Tell me how all that sovereignty is feeling today. All that control. Now we've got Brexit done. How's it all working out for you? 13 years they've been in charge. 13 years. And today's political discussion, today's political conversation, today's political headline is about the same people who've got exactly what they wanted for 13 years trying to set fire to something else. And now it's a circular firing squad. It was always going to be a circular firing squad. But at least when Theresa May was under attack, it was someone who understood the idiocy of Brexit and had tasked herself with trying to mitigate it, coming under attack from people who still believed in the brilliance of Brexit. Liz Truss undertook something of a U-turn, obviously, post-referendum, but by the time she got into Downing Street, she was a true believer. But Truss versus Sunak was the beginning of a circular firing squad. And now you've got Boris Johnson leading an attack on Rishi Sunak because Rishi Sunak has the audacity to believe that they should stick to the terms and conditions of the deal that Boris Johnson negotiated. 13 years. So call them what you will, ardent Brexiteers or Eurosceptics or blithering lying idiots, which is probably the more accurate description. People so arrogant and ignorant and incompetent that they believe a word on their birth certificate somehow qualifies them for special treatment on the world stage. 13 years, they've got exactly what they wanted. Every single vote, they got what they wanted, whether it's in the country as a whole or in Parliament in particular. They got David Cameron twice. They got their referendum. They won their referendum. They got Theresa May. They got Boris Johnson. They got Liz Truss. They got their withdrawal agreement. They got their Northern Ireland Protocol. They got Rishi Sunak. And now they want to set fire to that. The same people, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Bernard Jenkins, the Suella Blimmin Bravermans, the Boris Johnsons. They've got every single thing they wanted for nearly a decade and a half, and they're still bleating and whining and turning their fire on the people who believe that they should abide by the last thing they agreed, the thing that they all got elected on. Go on. Make sense of that for me. 13 years, every single thing they wanted. And it's still not enough. What else do they want? What else could there be? We've cut ourselves off from Europe. We've abolished freedom of movement. We've imposed economic sanctions on ourselves. We've filleted our jobs market. We've waved goodbye to countless nurses, doctors, fruit pickers, you name it. We've waved goodbye to them. We've got shortage of vets. We've got shortage of fruits. We've got shortage of this. We've got shortages of that. What do they want next? What do they want to break next? What do they want to set fire to next? Well, you know the answer to that. The European Convention on Human Rights, one of Winston Churchill's proudest and most powerful legacies. That's what they want to set fire to next. We haven't even got there yet. Just think about it for a minute. If you're still enthralled to these reprobates, think about it for a minute. Every single thing they told you would be good, they got. And it's all rubbish. And we're back to Northern Ireland. We're back to Northern Ireland. The fact that you cannot have the treaty upon which the peace process culminated living in harmony with a full withdrawal from customs union and single market regulation. You simply can't have both. I remember the moment the penny dropped on that. It was a caller not unlike Anne, actually, who was driving across the border this morning when I had the unpleasant duty of informing her that an absolute weapon called Bernard Jenkins had decided now was the time to suggest we should bring back a land border in Ireland, on the island of Ireland. She's literally driving across it. There's a fellow who rang in and said, well, there's a bit of a problem with this, James, if they were to bring back checks on the Irish border, because I've done a bit of building work since the Good Friday Agreement was introduced, and my kitchen's in the north, but the rest of my house is actually in the south. So what's going to happen to me? I'm going to have a border check when I go to boil an egg in the morning. You just sit here and you think, well, look, I'm not a genius. I'm not a historian. I'm not an expert on the Troubles. Look, I'm an O'Brien, so I grew up probably reading a little bit more about it than I would have done if I was a Johnson or a Rees-Mogg, for example. But even I understand that you can't really have a border through someone's bloody house. And here's Bernard Jenkins popping up 7 years after the referendum suggesting, I've got a great idea, let's have a border through someone's bloody house. It's not normal, this. It's not normal. This is not supposed to still be happening. You wake up in the morning and someone hits you in the face with a frying pan. You don't say, well, that was wonderful. I can't wait until tomorrow when I get hit in the face with another frying pan. You say, what can we do to stop getting hit in the face with a frying pan? And you begin by locking people like Bernard Jenkins, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Suella Braverman and the rest of them in a dark cellar somewhere and letting the grown-ups at least have a go. And God help me, Rishi Sunak is the grown-up at the moment. A ridiculous human being. Someone writing essays in support of Brexit when he was still in the sixth form. But he's not actually bonkers. And he knows what needs to be done. And this lot aren't going to let him. The people who've got every single thing they've wanted for the last 13 years are not going to let what currently in the vista of UK Conservative politics, Rishi Sunak passes for a grown-up, albeit that he's shackled at the ankles to an absolute liability like Suella Braverman. He passes for a grown-up and they're going to try not to let him do it. Why? Well, because we won't be in charge of things. What are you in charge of now? You're in charge of crumbling hospitals, collapsing schools, striking workforces, unrunning trains, filthy water. What are you in charge of now? You're in charge of everything. And you've wrecked it all. And now you want to wreck another thing. Now you want to wreck the next thing. Now you want to wreck the possibility of a compromise that would keep Northern Ireland safe and secure and relatively prosperous. And then if you wreck that, you move on to the European Convention of Human Rights. You set fire to that as well. And then what? What comes after that? What do you eat next? What do you torch next? How many more years of getting every single thing you want do you have to enjoy before you recognise that you've been wrong about everything? Every single thing. And now it's so obvious that you're wrong about everything. You're going back to your greatest hits. Your greatest hits of wrongness. Jacob Rees-Mogg and Bernard Jenkins going back on the road one more time, calling for a return of a border on the island of Ireland. An insight, or rather a contribution to public discourse so murderously stupid that you wonder how these people can tie their own shoelaces. And when this was theoretical, when we were simply describing what would happen if you set the Good Friday Agreement on a course with Theresa May's ridiculous red lines, when we were simply predicting and describing what was going to happen, I can understand how you might have responded by saying, oh, don't be silly, we'll be fine, there's nothing to worry about. You remember that bloke? You'd have to be a bit of a VIP member of the listenership to remember the bloke with red trousers in Wells Next to the Sea in Norfolk who was handing out leaflets for Brexit just about a week before the vote came down. I was there enjoying some sea air. I had a little pot of cockles in my hand and I just wandered up to him. I said, I'm just a little bit worried about what's going to happen in Northern Ireland. Mrs. O'Brien caught my eye from the other side of the seaside promenade and she gave me that look that says, leave it. Leave it, we're on holiday. Anti-blooming disaster. So what are Boris Johnson and his mates trying to do? Trying to set fire to the thing that got them into power in the first place. Of winning.
You will benefit from better care provided by our NHS thanks to the reallocation of funds from the EU budget.
Lie.
Controlled immigration will lead to reduced waiting times for you and your loved ones.
How's that working out for you?
Excess funding that would otherwise be sent to Brussels could also be directed to education, meaning better prospects for your children.
Absolutely.
Your wages will rise thanks to better controlled immigration, which will lead to less competition for jobs. Your weekly food shop will become cheaper.
Oh, that's
Food
good.
prices will no longer be inflated by agricultural policies controlled by the EU.
Absolutely.
You and your family will benefit from a resurgent economy led by new and flourishing small businesses following the removal of burdensome EU regulations and red tape.
Oh, this is despicable.
With less pressure on housing, younger generations will also find it easier to get on the housing
I
ladder.
thought this was going to be funny.
Politicians, both local and national,
It's not funny, is
will
it?
become more accountable, helping to strengthen your community.
This is
and
Farage's
others,
lot, by the way.
especially those most damaged by EU policies, like farming, fishing, and industries like steel. A more prosperous and safer future awaits us outside the EU. A vote to leave is a vote for a brighter future for you, your family, and your community.
Right. I mean, apart from the cheesy music, that is absolutely reprehensible. I'm going to play that again because I told Keith to leave the mic open so I could do a sort of very, very, very poor Graham Norton tribute act as if we were doing the Eurovision Song Contest, and I'd come in with some pithy comments. I'm actually livid. I'm actually quite upset because I played that out to you just after reading a text from someone who is describing themselves as gutted, someone who's poorly, someone who's in and out of hospital all the time and believed those lies. And by believing those lies contributed, and this is why he's beating himself up, contributed to making everything worse. So next time you see Farage baring his filthy teeth on the telly, just think about this. And the other fella, the one who I bumped into in Soho the other night, what's his name? He's still knocking around somewhere, isn't he, with a political party? They were behind this. This is them. Still out there, demanding your attention, chasing your votes. Incredible, really. This is them. This is leave.eu. This is the Farage side of it, not the Cummings side of it. Listen to this again. Listen to every syllable of it. And then send me a text saying that you're absolutely delighted with how everything is going because you got exactly what you voted for.
You will benefit from better care provided by our NHS thanks to the reallocation of funds from the EU budget. Controlled immigration will lead to reduced waiting times for you and your loved ones. Excess funding that would otherwise be sent to Brussels could also be directed to education, meaning better prospects for your children. Your wages will rise thanks to better controlled immigration, which will lead to less competition for jobs. Your weekly food shop will become cheaper. Food prices will no longer be inflated by agricultural policies controlled by the EU. You and your family will benefit from a resurgent economy led by new and flourishing small businesses following the removal of burdensome EU regulations and red tape. With less pressure on housing, younger generations will also find it easier to get on the housing ladder. Politicians, both local and national, will become more accountable, helping to strengthen your community and others, especially those most damaged by EU policies like farming, fishing, and industries like steel. A more prosperous and safer future awaits us outside the EU. A vote to leave is a vote for a brighter future for you, your family, and your community.
And there it is. Every single promise has been broken. Every single lie has been exposed. And it has barely started. We're at the end of the beginning. And still, there are corners of the media, the fourth estate, the tribune of the people, the means by which the public can find out what the politicians are really doing. And in the United Kingdom in 2022, the media is part of a conspiracy of silence about the absolute catastrophe of a project they sold to an undeserving public. Oh, you don't believe in democracy? The lies they tell. Just any time someone says to you that people who wanted a second referendum or people who are still opposed to Brexit, anytime anybody says to you that they're anti-democratic, just play them that and remind them that we're not anti-democratic. Should we go in on this? Should we do it? We haven't done it for a while. It's been a long, long time. Who remembers the last time we did? When was the last time we did it? I mean, we touched on some issues. We've touched on issues, haven't we? We've talked about huge shortages in all sorts of sectors, from veterinarians to fruit pickers and pretty much everywhere in between, the decimation of the hospitality sector. We've talked about the difficulties of exporting. We've talked about the almost impossibility of being a touring musician these days in continental Europe. We have touched on some of the issues, but we haven't for a long time. Keith, when did you last get the tin out? Can you remember when you last got the tin out? There'll be people listening to this program who have no idea what I'm talking about. Such a continuing march of LBC's burgeoning popularity, while Radio 4 hemorrhages listeners and we scale ever dizzier new heights. There will be people listening to this program who don't know they don't even know what the tin is. What's the tin they're saying? And who's Keith? They're saying at the moment. Must be a little less niche. I'm talking about